Back during our first trip to Ukraine, well, actually our first trip to Zhytomyr, Ukraine, when we planted the church there were two different teams that went. One was led by Tommy South. They got there a week before this big citywide campaign that we were doing. The second one was led by Tom Norville that stayed a week after the campaign was over and did some follow-up teaching and that sort of thing. But we were there together the week of the big campaign. Well, the government official that was sort of helping us make connections and reserving places and all of that was really helpful for the group that came first and eventually for the group that came second, but he was totally freaked out when the two groups were there at the same time because both Tommy and Tom acted like they were the leaders, and it confused him. He was in his, I guess, Soviet-raised system, was used to somebody being in charge, and at one point he sort of threw his arms up and said, "Okay, who is boss?" And he needed to know who was in charge. As it turned out later, he needed to know who to hit up for bribes. We found out that after the fact, that that's what he was doing behind the scenes. But it is good to know who is boss when you're dealing with any organization. And that's where Paul leads us this morning as we continue our look at 1 Thessalonians. Now, I know I said in the last lesson before vacation, by the time we came back, we'd be ready for 2 Thessalonians. Well, evidently, my spiritual gift is not reading calendars or paying attention to what I'd already drawn up. There's actually 2 more lessons left in 1 Thessalonians. I think subconsciously I'm trying to rush David on moving here so I can hand the reins over to him. And it's like skipping sections in 1 Thessalonians is going to help that. So we continue looking in 1 Thessalonians as Paul is now winding down what he's been doing in the book. He's been dealing with a church that's fairly new, and they're struggling with several things, but the main question seemingly on their mind is about the second coming of Jesus. And he deals with that misunderstanding, and now he's ready to wrap it all up and move on. Now, he'll have to revisit that topic of the second coming when he gets to 2 Thessalonians, and so we'll have a couple of interesting lessons when we get there. But now he's tying things up as Paul usually does in his letters. He mentions several things of practical nature that they need to give attention to. And the first one is really providential for us. Sometimes when you're just preaching through a book, the way we've been doing in 1 and 2 Thessalonians, you come across sections that are really interesting and kind of fun to kind of pick apart and figure out what's going on. But then you have a hard time, okay, how does that apply to us today? That's going to happen in 2 Thessalonians. We get to this long section where Paul is talking about the man of sin, the man of lawlessness that's going to be revealed. And we're trying to wonder, okay, how does that apply to us? But this section that Paul is getting ready to do that we're looking at this morning is rather providential because he's going to deal with leaders and followers. We're in a period of transition in the church here. For the first time in 46 years, one preacher is retiring and handing the baton to the next one coming in. So that's kind of different. And now we're adding to our eldership. We're still working. Elders are still talking to the men whose names have surfaced, and you'll be hearing more about that in the weeks to come. And we just said goodbye to our family minister, Associate Minister Roger, who's been here. So it's the time of transition all the way around. So as Paul deals with the church, and he has this section where he's going to talk first to the church and their responsibility to elders, and then secondly gives us a little look at what the job description of elders was in a small little way that applied directly to the church at Thessalonica. Gives us an idea what we are looking for men to do. So this really does apply to us as we are thinking about elders. So he's going to have 2 basic sections in this very short little thing where he's going to talk first to those who follow. And essentially what he's going to say is that the church needs to honor their leaders. So, verse 12. Now we ask you, brothers and sisters, to acknowledge those who work hard among you who care for the Lord, who care for you in the Lord. Okay, so he says we need to honor, acknowledge, give attention to be thankful for it. Different words are used in different translations, but all of that is to say you are to recognize, and he's going to go on to say, make their job easier. Now, so the first thing that the church needs to do is to understand that those who lead the church need to be honored because of it. In fact, Paul's going to say to Timothy, some are worthy of double honor. So in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 17, the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. So the elders who manage the work, it's kind of interesting because much of the work of elders is really behind the scenes. We're going to look at some of the things that elders are called to do a little bit later, but there are some whose giftedness is in preaching and teaching, and they're worthy of double honor. And you know the reference from the Old Testament. He goes on to say, don't muzzle the ox who treads out the grain. As you can maybe be able to tell in the picture you're looking at, that ox has a muzzle on, and that's to keep him from eating what while he's working. And in the Old Testament, you didn't do that. If the ox is going to do the work, it's entitled to an occasional mouthful of grain while he's working. And Paul's actual reference there is to pay. Those who work full-time in the work of the church, especially those who preach and teach, they're worthy of not only honor, but also of salary. But whether we're talking about money or whether we're just talking about honor, the responsibility of the church is to make the job of the elder as easy as possible, to recognize they're working hard and to cooperate and work along with them. Go back to verse 12 of 1 Thessalonians. I left out a part the last time we read it. Notice what is said here. Now we ask you, brothers and sisters, to acknowledge those who work hard among you, who care for you in the Lord, and who admonish you. Elders are supposed to admonish us. Now we're used to the idea of preachers sometimes stepping on your toes, right? Part of the job description. Every once in a while, somebody will tell me as they're leaving, that was a great sermon, which they're contractually obligated to do. But then they'll add, you really stepped on my toes this morning. Now, there have been times when I've been tempted to say, okay, so what are you going to do about it? But I've never done that. No, the idea of the elders, I mean, suppose you get a visit from a couple of the elders and they tell you, we've noticed that you've been doing such and such, and we don't believe that's healthy for you spiritually, and we think you should reconsider that. Well, that's part of the job description. They care for your souls. Their job is to look out for us, and if sometimes that calls for them to admonish us, now they shouldn't enjoy that. I remember somebody telling me of a elder at the church where they were serving that newly, they just added him a couple of meetings after he was added as a new elder. He came in and said, listen guys, if there's ever a time where we need to call somebody on the carpet, if we need to nail somebody's hide to the wall, I need to do that because that's my spiritual gift. Well, that's not a spiritual gift at all. That's a work of the flesh. If you enjoy hollering at people, then church work is really not the place for you. But elders have a responsibility, and we are called to honor them because that's a very difficult job. It goes on to say, hold them in the highest regard and love because of their work. Live at peace with each other. Now, when he says hold them in highest regard, he doesn't mean put them on a pedestal, because the only person that belongs on a pedestal is Jesus. You put a human being on a pedestal, they're going to fall off. In fact, the higher the pedestal, the more dramatic the fall. That we need to hold them in highest regard, recognizing that even their best efforts in serving the church are going to be flawed, and sometimes they're going to mess up. I mean, that's what human beings do. But we need to appreciate them for their work and make it easy for them. And he makes the point that one way that you make it easy for them is to live in peace with each other. You know, as we'll see a little bit later, part of the job of the elder is acting as a peacemaker. But if they have to do that all the time, if they are constantly called to step between warring factions of the church, then the whole work of the church has to shut down while they take care of that problem that has popped up. And so one way that we can honor them and one way that we can make their job easy is to just get along with each other. And that will make their job so much easier. Notice what the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews 13 and verse 17. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Understand that as we had an elder years ago, very brief time, we had like 7 elders and he was just added to the eldership. And we were talking, and he meant this kind of humorously, I think. But he said, you know, after we'd had several different elders meetings and we just had to deal with one problem that had just come up. And he came to me after that and he said, Tuck, all of my life as a member of the church, I've complained about how the elders do things. Now I am one, I don't know how to behave. You know, you can spend a lot of time not appreciating the difficulty that elders have in leading the church. They keep watch over us as those who must give an account. They're going to answer to God for the job that they did as our shepherds, leaders, elders. And so we need to understand that. But the writer continues, do this so their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefit to you. One of the, say this kind of humorously, but I've been in situations and I've had preachers that I know who've really been in situations where they described somebody in the church as almost launching a political campaign trying to get elected to be elder. They were doing everything except hand out buttons, vote for me, you know, sort of thing, like it was a Democratic campaign where they're trying to be elected. And the observation I heard one preacher make is, you know, somebody that desperately wants to be an elder is obviously not qualified to be one because they don't understand what the job is about. It's very difficult. And so the writer in Hebrews reminds us to honor them to the extent that we make their joy a burden. We're easy to get along with. That good leaders are better when the people they lead are easy to be led, if that makes any sense at all. Sheep are really good at getting lost and wandering off in all different directions. Sometimes I think that, as we see in the picture, that elders must feel like they're trying to herd cats rather than sheep. It can be a very difficult job. Okay, so that's what he says to the church, and now he's going to say something to the leaders themselves. He's going to sort of give a summary of the job of elders. Now, this isn't the totality of the job. This is in keeping with something that was going on in the church that he knew about. So he raises several aspects of their job. He's talking to the church, so the church knows what the elder's job is as well. So he's going to say different things. The first thing he says is that part of the job of elders is to warn the disruptive. So he says this, and we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. Remember the situation that we outlined at Thessalonica where they became so convinced that Jesus was coming back, they thought it was going to be like a week from Tuesday. And so many of them were just sitting around waiting. I mean, if you knew Jesus was coming back a week from Tuesday, there's probably some things that you would prioritize, and probably going to work would not be one of them. You know, if you have off days, you'd probably take them. And that's what some of those people were doing. And the problem was they were sitting around idle and becoming disruptive. You know the old saying that idle hands are the devil's workshop. And so they were causing problems. And so it becomes part of the job of leadership to make sure those kinds of issues are dealt with. Warn those who are being disruptive. One of the themes in the New Testament, it comes back again and again. You know, we sometimes throw the term false doctrine or false teacher around very discriminately, aiming at anybody we disagree with theologically. But the most mentioned theological error that comes up in the New Testament is those that cause division among Christians. It's not necessarily what they're teaching. Sometimes it's how they teach and how they want to be the center of attention. But anyone that sows discord among brothers and sisters, they need to be dealt with. And it becomes part of the job of the elder to do that, to make sure that we are getting along together. So he tells the church, be easy to get along with, and now he's telling the elders, part of your job is to make sure that happens and to deal with anyone that is being disruptive. He also wants the elders to know their job is to help those who struggle, to encourage those who are disheartened, to help the weak. Those may be two totally different people. The weak may be new Christians or Christians that are struggling with addictions, Christians that are struggling with some sin. The disheartened may be super strong Christians. We have this tendency, unfortunately, in the church to mark people as either strong, mature Christians or weak and struggling Christians. But sometimes the Christians that are struggling the most are ones that we peg as strong. They've just gotten to the end of their rope. They are burned completely and totally out, and because we expect them to have it all together, they don't get the help that they need. In politics, your job is to make sure your constituents are taken care of. You represent your constituents. Now, in the old days, that meant the people that vote for you. These days, it means those that give you the most money. You got to keep them happy. You know, the golden rule sort of thing. The ones that have the gold make the rules. Well, church isn't a political campaign. In a business, the employee that's honored the most is the one that's the most productive. Well, the church is not a business. The church is a family. And in families, the ones who get the most attention are always whoever it is that needs it. You know, babies don't contribute much to the well-being of the family, but they get the lion's share of the attention because they need it. The kid that is sick or a family member that's going through they get the attention because at that particular time, they need it. And that's the way it is to be in the family. The elders are supposed to be there to help and to encourage whoever it is that is struggling the most. And in one particular time or another, sooner or later, that's going to be all of us. And he tells them to be patient with everybody, because you got to be patient to be an elder. The word that's used here literally is long-tempered. Elders are supposed to be, we know what short-tempered is. Well, elders can't be that. None of us should be that, but particularly those who are leading can't be short-tempered. They have to be long. In fact, elders are told not to be combative, not to be violent, not to be argumentative. Those are part of the qualities that Paul mentions in 1 Timothy 2. You can't have elders flying off the handle because they're going to deal with issues that need to be dealt with kid gloves. And so therefore, patience. I know the elders here have been very patient. I mean, I've been here for 46 years. They have to be really patient to put up with me for that long. But one of the things we had to be patient about is because of, at least, back in the old days before COVID, the church here was made up so much of military and government service, which meant we kind of changed the church every 4 to 6 years. So the elders would work hard, we'd get everybody on the same page, and then there was the fruit basket turnover, and we have a different church, and we're not even in the same book, so we have to start all the way over again. And so patience is always needed when you're dealing with people. And then finally, he ends, make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else. So you can't return evil for evil. You can't retaliate. Well, that's the responsibility of the church, but here it's the role of the leaders, the elders, that are supposed to make sure nobody is do that. They are to function in the role of peacemaker. The most uncomfortable place to observe a fight is right in the middle of the warring factions as you're trying to be a peacemaker, but that's the job that elders are called to be. And sometimes that's the job that is the most difficult. We have to get along with one another, to love one another, to be in fellowship with one another so the world will know we're following Jesus. And it is the role of the elders to make sure that we're doing that. One of the things that came up when I was visiting with my mother is she was talking about the church that they used to go to that had gone through a split, and it was caused by the preacher. Usually the case, right? Well, the preacher decided he was above the elders, and there was this constant power struggle going on, even to the point where the preacher in his sermons and classes would make derogatory statements about, unless you can understand that unless you're an elder, those kinds of things. Passive aggressive sort of. And he wouldn't take direction. He wouldn't do what he was asked to do by the elders. And so back and forth, they tried their best to handle it until finally they couldn't, and so they fired him. Now, Mom said the problem was they were not transparent in that process. They tried way too hard to keep the church from knowing that there was an issue going on. They didn't want there to be a big scandal. And so when the preacher was fired, nobody in the church had any background whatsoever, and it caused a huge split. Here's what she said, to the best of this is a paraphrase, of course. Go ahead and write down what she said. I wish I had. She said this: their mistake was in keeping the church in the dark. If everyone knew what was going on, they would have better understood why the preacher was fired, and fewer people would have left. My mom's a wise woman, and absolutely. The tendency for elders is to try to keep problems from being known by everyone else. They want to take the burden away from everyone, and in doing that sometimes, there's a lack of transparency. The church doesn't know there's something going on, and so when it blows up, there's a big surprise. And what could have been dealt with as it grew now is a big hairy thing all to itself, and the church is derailed. Remember the very first issue that could have derailed the very first church. There was a group in the church of Jerusalem in Acts 6 that thought that they were out-of-towners. They had come in for Pentecost, been converted at Pentecost, and had stayed. And they were thinking that the poor that were being taken care of by the church sort of shaded to people that were from Jerusalem. The out-of-towners' widows were being overlooked, and they felt they were being discriminated against. So when this was made known to the apostles, the very first thing they did was call a big meeting and explain to the whole group what was going on, and then they included the church in the solution. You pick out among yourselves 7 men full of wisdom and the Holy Spirit, and we'll place them in charge of making sure everybody gets a fair share of the daily distribution of food. And the saying pleased the whole crowd, and what could have been a huge issue was taken care of in one church meeting. So elders have to do what they can do in order to make sure peace is kept. And sometimes that means making problems known to the whole group so that we as a church can work through the issue together. I think I've shared the old story of an elder that died and woke up at the pearly gates. And of course it was Peter standing looking down at him as he comes to, because Peter is always on station at the pearly gates. You know how the stories go. And Peter looks down and says, "Hey, you were an elder, weren't you?" And the guy looks up and says, yeah, how did you know? And Peter says, well, it was the relieved look on your face when you realized you were dead. Being a leader in the church can be a very difficult thing. You're asked to have solutions to problems when in reality you don't fully understand the problem. It's a position that has to be undertaken with extreme care and with a lot of prayer and with a lot of patience, both with the church and with yourself and with the other church leaders. I think that we need to do a better job as a church in honoring those who lead us, and especially that means doing what we can to make their job as easy as it can be. I know there are 4 or 5 guys that are sitting out there considering the requests that the elders have made to them, thinking about stepping into that role. And I guess Paul decided that you needed to step into it with your eyes wide open to what the job requires. And so this text just comes up in our study. As we sing this next song, our elders will be stationed at the back of the auditorium. If there's something that you're struggling with that you need prayer for, then go to the back as we sing and let them know what that is. Maybe you can go with one of them back to the prayer room and spend some time in prayer this morning. If there's something that you would like them to make known to the church, then do so. I'll let them know that, and they'll make that known. Or if you're ready to, based on your faith in Jesus, to step into the Christian story and have your sins washed away at the cross, being baptized for the remission of your sins, then let them know that, and they'll help you with that as well. Let's all stand as we sing this next song together.